Hi, I'm Ali, and in this video we're going to talk about two more essential techniques that you need to know. So the first one of these is backstitching, and the second one is how to turn a corner. So let's look at backstitching. So in an earlier video, when we went through the orientation of the levers and buttons on your machine, we talked about a little button on the front of your machine called the backstitching lever. And this is actually a button or a lever that will make your machine stitch in reverse. So this is a very important feature that you need to do when we sew stitches to stop the beginning and the end of those stitches coming undone. So I want you to have a little look at your first scrap of fabric where you started to sew everything on. So where you've done your first line of stitching on, and just pull those layers apart. We haven't done any back stitching on these layers, and you can actually see that without too much pressure here, those stitches are just popping open and coming undone. So this is what's going to happen with a seam or a row of stitches that is not reinforced at the beginning. Reinforcing is another way of saying back stitching. So we're going to cover how to do this. So you're going to take your piece of fabric and you're going to align it under the presser foot, and I want you to have that top edge of fabric right on the edge where the needle is basically going to hit. So just do your best to have a look at that and align that by eye. Sometimes your stitching plate is going to have a little line on it that you can put the edge of your fabric up to. Otherwise, you're just going to do this as best you can. You're going to lower the presser foot, hold on to those threads, and then we're going to stitch about 2 or 3 stitches. So if your foot is a little bit sensitive, just do your best here to press as gently as you can. We're going to stitch forward for 2 or 3 stitches, and then you're going to hold that reverse button down. Sometimes your machine might hold it down by itself once you've pushed it. Either way, you're going to push that down, and we're going to reverse back to the beginning of the edge of that fabric, and then you're going to let go and then stitch forward again. And that is how you do back stitching. So this is going to take a little bit of practice as to how hard to push your lever down. I have to push this lever down quite firmly to get my machine to actually go into reverse stitching. So you can actually stitch all the way down the line of this stitching, so along your fabric, and just practice pushing that lever backwards and forwards, and just get used to the way the fabric feels as it's going in reverse and as it goes forward again. Now, as we come up to the other edge of our fabric, you also want to sew some back stitches at this edge of the stitches too, to lock everything together so that when those stitches are under stress, they're not going to pop open. So now I'm at the end of my fabric, I'm going to hold that lever down, sew a couple of stitches, and then sew forward again until I reach the end, and then pull my fabric out and cut my thread. So now we're going to talk about how to turn a corner. So there is a specific way of changing direction when you want to turn a right angle, or even another significant angle when you're stitching. This is really important because it's going to keep your stitches looking nice and even without having any pulled stitches. So this is one of the reasons we practiced being able to stop on a point in this earlier video. And so once again, we're going to mark a series of dots on the fabric for this exercise. And this time, I want you to mark them in a zigzag fashion or in a right angle fashion, basically like some teeth separated apart a little bit. And we're going to practice sewing and stopping on these dots and turning the corner. So the first thing we're going to do is once again put that needle down into the first dot. So hold your threads hand crank that needle around to the front, and then we're going to sew up to that first dot as close as we can, and we're going to stop with the needle down inside the stitch plate. So this is very important when you turn a corner, because it's going to anchor your fabric in place, and it's going to stop anything pulling when we raise that presser foot, because when the presser foot is raised, the fabric is then loose underneath the sewing machine, and the weight of your project can actually pull that out of place and mean that those threads will loop and become quite loose and will just ruin the overall look of everything. So make sure that you're stopping with that needle down, and if it's not on that dot, then turn that wheel until you get to that point. So now I'm on that dot, I've got my needle down right on that dot. I'm going to raise my presser foot and turn my fabric so that now I'm 90 degrees around from the direction I was going, and I can see the next dot right in front of where I'm going. So I'm going to lower the presser foot and then stitch down towards that dot. Then I'm dropping that needle right down again, raising my presser foot and turning my work 90 degrees again until I've got the next dot in front of me. So now I want you to sew right through all of these dots that you've drawn in a series of right angle turns until you're feeling really comfortable with turning a corner. And just another reminder to sew as slowly as you can while you're doing all of this. This is really important for learning accuracy and staying in control of what you're doing. So that's how you turn a corner when you are sewing. So I want to mention that the most important part of straight sewing is keeping the edge of your fabric aligned to a particular point on your sewing machine. So that's either going to be your presser foot or a marking on the stitch plate, which is going to control the seam allowance that you're sewing with. So now we're going to practice turning a corner using the edge of the presser foot as a guide, and we want to make sure that we're going to stop at the correct point so that when we turn that corner, the next edge of the fabric is also going to be aligned to the edge of the presser foot. So this is going to take a little bit of estimating. Sometimes you can mark this point with your marking pen as well. I'm going to try and do this by eye and show you that you can do this just by estimating and practicing as you keep sewing. Okay, so now I've estimated the distance that I need to stop from the edge of my fabric. I've got my needle down inside my fabric. I'm raising the presser foot and turning my work to 90 degrees. And when I lower my presser foot, I have got my fabric aligning with the edge of that presser foot. So I know I've stopped in the right position. So what can you do if you accidentally stitch past the point that you needed to stop at? Well, you can do a couple of back stitches, and then you can hand crank your needle back to the position where you needed to be, or you can measure and mark a dot where you need to turn if you would prefer to do it that way. But it is a really good skill to be able to estimate where you are, and the more you practice working with fabric and sewing seams, that you will get better and better at doing this without marking anything. So that's it for this video. Now in the next video, we're going to cover unpicking and recovering from when we make a mistake, which is another really essential skill. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you there.